After two attempts with the All-Star and Earth 1 universes to copy the success of the Marvel Ultimates universe, DC are having their third crack with the Absolute universe. And Absolute Batman, to its credit, is selling very well. A nice mix of anime art style, a reinvention of the character, and a refresher spearheaded by beloved writer Scott Snyder. Now, Scott has never been secretive about his personal politics. He has largely kept politics out of his Batman books until now. The Absolute Batman origin features what was meant to be a school shooting, but it was changed to that of a zoo because school shootings were, of course, a radioactive topic, and it's never discussed which kinds of shooters are most frequently the culprits as of late. However, Scott wanted to depict a school shooting as the origin point for a new Batman whose mother is a social worker, whose dad is a teacher, who grows up working class, and will inevitably fight a wealthy billionaire psychopath Joker. So there is a political taint to Absolute Batman, and this has come to the fore with its brand new annual that came out this month, and is written, one of the stories is written and drawn by Daniel Warren Johnson, who led the way on IDW's much praised Transformers series. And Daniel Warren Johnson put out the following sketch. Now, the actual narrative of the annual is about Batman fighting a white separatist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi group. But Daniel Warren Johnson put out this drawing of Batman strangling an ICE agent. Now, this has, of course, caused a lot of political controversy because it is insinuating that superheroes should commit lethal, and in this case, Absolute Batman does kill, lethal violence against law enforcement officers who are carrying out their lawful duties in removing illegal immigrants and foreign criminals from your country. And this comes at a time where Antifa activists are firebombing ICE facilities, obstructing deportations, and where a leftist activist in Texas tried to shoot at an ICE vehicle and ended up killing only illegal immigrants being processed before shooting himself. And he put anti-ICE on his bullet casings, copying Charlie Kirk's shooter who put "Hey, fascist, catch." So this is what the left themselves would call stochastic terrorism. This is building a climate, a permission structure where violence against your political opponents is encouraged, endorsed, permitted, whereas violence against your own side, which infrequently, if ever, happens, is decried as proof of imminent totalitarianism from your political opponents. So it's a self-reinforcing system. But it raised a more important question, because beneath this, lots of people were dunking on him saying, wow, don't you feel vindicated about your political positions because you drew a fictional character who happens to agree with you? This was also a panel that went viral from the annual, where a violent thug in question, leading a band of skinheads to attack people with a Negan-like baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire, says pure power and gets halfway through white power doing a Roman, and Batman then shatters his elbow. This is, of course, a proxy for fighting people that have been called fascists, Nazis, and white supremacists. Because this sort of thing is not actually going on in America right now. I know people will point to the Unite the Right rally at Charlottesville, or some of the Hitler apologia made by some of the more popular commentators online, and you might think those things are odious. But when the people being called fascists are the likes of the deceased Charlie Kirk, there is a conflation with who is actually a fascist, a neo-Nazi, a white supremacist, and thereby deserves this lethal force from the left's beloved fictional characters. So, in the annual, Batman's father points out that there is a white supremacist extremist attack in Gotham. He remembers before his father was killed that he was agonizing over this, and in his father's honor, he decides to infiltrate this white supremacist encampment that is committing indiscriminate violence wearing Professor Pig masks, which was quite strange, and then uses a flamethrower on the encampment in honor of his father after brutalizing them because they have been attacking random people. And so this is saying, yet again, much like it did way back in 2016, not just punch a Nazi, but brutalize, kill, set fire to Nazis. Now, The problem with that is, of course, the parameters for Nazi are never properly defined, because Kamala Harris, in a week or so before the election last year, was calling Donald Trump Adolf Hitler. She was saying he was a fascist. And so we end up with multiple assassination attempts against the president's life, up to the election, and the killing of Charlie Kirk, who, even after he was murdered on camera, and his grieving widow has now been mocked, there are members of Congress still insulting his memory and insinuating that he deserved it because he said things that they didn't like. So, justifying, yet again, more political violence. I've made a lengthy video on this that I will link down in the description. Members of Congress have also been engaged in doxing the addresses and names of ICE officers, which is why they're now wearing masks. And them wearing masks to shield their identities from their families being persecuted for their lawful activities, you know, like what Batman does. That has been used as proof of Trump's totalitarianism, which has been then used to justify violence against them. So this annual is, I would think, knowingly, a piece of stochastic terrorism against people that they call Nazis. And they are not applying that label correctly in all times and places. So, as Oren McIntyre has pointed out, the label at this point, fascist or Nazi or even racist, often just means people that I endorse violence against. Is this in character for Batman? Because clearly Batman would attack vigilante, violent groups regardless of their ideology, right? Well, there has been a concerted effort by writers over the last 2 decades to reconfigure Batman into being a left-wing character. Grant Morrison wrote about this pretty openly in Supergods for Superman, where he said that originally Superman was a champion of social justice by the contemporary parlance, when what Superman was doing, actually, was breaking down the doors of domestic abusers. He wasn't beating up white people and giving all their stuff to black people as an act of reparations, or he wasn't marching in pride parades. But these things that we would consider not morally objectionable, for example, beating up actual militant white separatist gangs that are just indiscriminately attacking people on the basis of their race, or saving women from domestic abusers, are then conflated with a suite of other leftist politics that we would find reprehensible. And that has been smuggled in to Batman, which is completely out of character for him. Well, who are you to say this is out of character, you might ask, considering these are writers paid by DC who have written Batman for a very long time, and so may have some credibility on the subject. Well, I don't have a track record of writing Batman, but I do have quite the track record of reading Batman. My first comic was actually the return of Jason Todd in Batman Hush, the single floppy, all the way back in the early 2000s, and ever since I've built up a rather nice library of comic books, which I quite like. Some of them still have the wrapper on them because, unfortunately, it's been a busy year, but I have read plenty of these. I just like buying the premium collected edition. So I would like to say that, and my previous series on lotuseaters.com, Comics Corner, means that I have an understanding of what makes Batman as a character tick. And I would say that Batman is a deeply reactionary character whose willingness to apply force to restore order, rather than just resort to redistributing all wealth, liberating prisons, and treating everyone as if the criminals themselves are oppressed by society, and therefore everyone's a blank slate, that means that Batman is not a left-wing character. He never has been, and attempts to rewrite him as a character is an attempt to defile the legacy of the character, to co-opt him for your political ends, those political ends being, as we've seen, violent rage fantasies. This has been a tactic by Grant Morrison. This is an article from Playboy in 2012, so this is after his seminal Batman run and going into Batman Incorporated after the New 52 was launched. And they asked Morrison what he thought about Batman. And he said, "I got interested in the class element of Batman. He's a rich man who beats up poor people. It's quite a bizarre mission to go out at night dressed as a bat and punch the hell out of junkies. And then he goes home and lives in a mansion. There's an aspirational quality to him. He's an outlaw and he can buy anything. He has a new Batmobile every movie." So, pausing there, yes, Grant, because not all crime is the consequence of material privation. Crime is the consequence of individual moral corruption. If you are taking drugs, as you do, Grant, that is a commentary on your character. You are indulging in vice, and if you indulge in one vice, it makes you more likely to indulge in other vices. If you are addicted to a substance and willing to harm yourself without any consideration for your family, your community, your friends, and the impacts it might have on them, then you are in pursuit of fulfilling that ignobling desire, more likely to commit a violent crime against someone else. This is why drug and alcohol addiction are intensely linked to things like domestic abuse, theft, and violent crime. So, we shouldn't be shocked about this, and the idea that Batman should instead not be a billionaire, give away all his wealth, house the homeless in Wayne Manor, and suddenly all the criminal problems of Gotham will be stopped is woefully naive and shows you don't understand the character. But it does perhaps help us understand why Grant Morrison's Batman run is filled with Batman fighting secret societies and the wealthy. Think The Black Glove, Dr. Simon Hurt, who has rewritten himself into the Wayne family legacy. There's kind of dark secret behind the Wayne fortune because he was a Thomas Wayne who was involved in the occult, and even Batman's own father knew about it and tried to keep it hidden. And Batman fights these mystical forces and becomes a self-generative god of his own making. This is part of Morrison's thesis that comic books can replace organized religion, specifically Christianity, and through fiction generate these Nietzschean superhuman values that can make us better than we actually are. So Grant Morrison sees comics as a form of social engineering. So what message is he trying to send? The message he's trying to send is the wealthy and the elite are intrinsically corrupt. You should be suspicious of hierarchies, and Batman shouldn't go around beating on people who are at the bottom of the socioeconomic run than him. Instead, we should have more sympathy for those people, even if they are terrorizing law-abiding people, because it's just because they don't have enough stuff. In fact, it's the wealthy cabal of billionaires taking the stuff away from them that makes them criminals. So, this is a complete misreading of Batman, and it is pretty common across other Batman runs. It started in Elseworld stories, alternative universes. This is the famous panel from Injustice: Gods Among Us, written by Tom Taylor, who wrote the Nightwing run with Bruno Redondo with the consecutive art, in the background of which, many remember, a progress transgender pride flag was snuck. So, in this panel, Batman and Catwoman are morally browbeating the President of the United States after Superman has accidentally killed Lois Lane, drugged by the Joker to make him think that his pregnant wife was actually Doomsday. He flew her into the upper atmosphere, she suffocated, so he kills the Joker and establishes a global dictatorship run by superheroes who are aligned with him to try to bring all conflicts to a halt. They even kill many people in Arkham Asylum, and accidentally, via Damian, Nightwing ends up getting killed, so Batman, out of principle and out of a personal vendetta, has a reason to oppose Superman. During this scene, Catwoman longhouses the President of the United States with a suite of banal left-wing talking points. She says, "We came here to tell you you need to do better. We acted surprised to see you on the rooftop. You'd gone to so much trouble. We didn't want you to feel bad." Batman says, "I voted for you." And he says, "How does that work? You go into a polling station and say, 'I'm Batman'?" And he says, "I've never had much time for men who grin and joke to avoid the truth." Catwoman says, "You need to be a better leader. We will fight against this regime, but you need a better job to do a better job. Health, education, gun control, poverty, the environment, not telling people who they can and can't love. So, you need to have universal healthcare, improve the education system with just more funding for failing schools, confiscate people's firearms, give even more welfare to people who are not living wholesome lifestyles, and, of course, give unalloyed support for the sexual revolution and LGBTQ and the ever-expanding acronym of sexual preference identities.'" So, just your boilerplate Democrat Party platform, which Catwoman, perhaps as a thief, might well endorse, but then Batman is standing over her as her stoic enforcer, condoning all of these politics. To say that Batman's highest priority is the Green New Deal and trans rights. Catwoman then goes on to say, "The reason so many support Superman's actions is because they're disenfranchised and disheartened and they want the world to be a better place. This country needs to have compassion again. You need to do better." The problem is not compassion. Gotham City does not lack a abundance of compassion. The problem is order. The criminals in Gotham are ontologically criminals. State-run grocery stores, cheaper bus fares, and better-funded public schools will not solve the Joker. They will not fix the Mad Hatter. So, this comic fails to understand its own villains, its own universe. It applies the liberal blank slate materialist presuppositions about how the world actually works, while being actively refuted by the nature of superheroes. Superheroes heighten moral drama with escalating the power level to make more obvious the moral implications of value conflicts via physical conflicts. So, for example, Superman cannot redistribute wealth to solve the problem of doomsday. You can only risk your life punching him into the ground and hope the problem goes away until evil returns again. It is a constant and valiant battle against entropy. The only way you can fix criminals like that are to confine them to a sufficient institution that hopefully they don't break out of, or, as Superman does in Injustice, give some of them the death penalty. The problem with Injustice is it's meant to be a cautionary tale about when power goes too far. Power can go too far. What you need to do is not act out of vengeance, but virtue. You need to act prudently, not with an excess of grief and emotion. But of course, Injustice gives the wrong lesson because the writer has a left-wing worldview that says that all corruption is downstream of insufficient material conditions. Then there's Batman the Fortress, written by Gary Whitta, that came out a couple of years ago. Plot being, there are power outages all across the United States, there are riots in Gotham. Batman swings over a street where an Antifa/Black Lives Matter style riot is going on, and this was written in the aftermath of the George Floyd riots of 2020, and he says he hasn't seen a night like this in a while. Last time it was this bad was with that damn fear gas at the water supply. Only so much I can do. Need to prioritize. Hunt the big fish, protect the little fish. These places all have insurance. Not my job to protect their profit margins. The idea yet again being that theft, looting, is a victimless crime. That it's fine, the businesses all have insurance, therefore they can cover the costs of people stealing HD TVs. First of all, a HD TV is not a necessary item. Raiding Foot Locker is not racial reparations. People are not stealing bread, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez once said, if they're looting Foot Locker and Walmart, notably leaving the suntan lotion and the Father's Day cards behind. Instead, what happens is, if you loot a business or burn it down, as happened during the Black Lives Matter riots, causing billions of dollars in property damage and killing multiple people, including police officer David Dorn, businesses don't want to open in those neighborhoods anymore. What you get, then, is the dilapidation of the neighborhood. Crime is not caused by poverty. Poverty causes crime because people that want to open decent businesses, provide regional opportunities, are risk averse, and they don't want to move into an area where their business is likely to go up in flames, and even if they get it covered on insurance, they will lose lots of profit, they will lose lots of time, their staff and themselves will be put at risk, and so they move out. And they leave the area boarded up, graffitied, dilapidated. So, no, theft is not a victimless crime, and no, Batman would not allow this to happen, because during the riot, people are going to get killed just like his parents were, by people that were just trying to steal things, like Joe Chill stealing the wallet and the pearls from his mother and father. Then there's the revision of Nightwing's origin story in Titans. I can't play the scene. 1, to save you from the awfulness that is Titans, but 2, because of course this video will be copyright struck, but Nightwing ends up going into prison in season 2 of Titans when he's struggling with his identity as Robin. He encounters 2 illegal immigrants that are going to be deported in the morning, and Nightwing, debuting his new costume, thwarts the deportation and allows the criminals to go free. The message, yet again, because it was the Trump administration, is don't deport undocumented, illegal immigrants, that's unjust, and the criminals themselves are the victim of unjust state oppression. This is the message that is being drummed home to you by this, by Daniel Warren Johnson's strangling ice image, by the idea that Batman doesn't care about people looting Gotham's businesses. Leftism is being snuck into Batman comics and properties to try to rewrite the history of these characters, to try to give the fans of these characters and the children that might be still reading or buying these comics a revolutionized moral outlook. People will base their moral worldviews on fiction as a kind of received wisdom, and so when they actually engage with politics, because they aren't particularly informed, because they derive most of their understanding of politics and their first principles from fiction, they will have a reflexive aversion to anything the Trump administration is doing, even if it's sensible and just. Then there's Batman by John Ridley, where during the 5G initiative, which was meant to be a complete recasting of the major superheroes and was then scrapped, John Ridley recast Batman, the next Batman, as Jace Fox, the troubled son from the late 70s and early 80s of Lucius Fox. Bear in mind, Luke Fox was already Batwing. New character, had his own comics in the New 52, sold middlingly, but they gave it a try. But instead, what they wanted to do, again, after the Black Lives Matter revolution, was recast Batman as a black man, who had been failed by the system, who had been misunderstood. Tom King in Gotham City Year One has also rewritten Batman's history to now make him part black. So Slam Bradley, the original protagonist of Detective Comics back in the 1930s, is written into Batman's history here to have investigated a story about murder and corruption to do with the Wayne family. And it is Batman's grandfather, who married into the Wayne family, who is known as the Batman because he kills women and he was having extramarital affairs with black prostitutes on the low-income side of Gotham. And the narrative is meant to depict Gotham as a racist place which marginalizes black people and engages in police brutality. And Slam Bradley is a former police detective who didn't like the fact that one of his fellow officers was being racially prejudiced against a suspect, and so was disciplined unfairly and dismissed. And the implication is Slam Bradley had an affair with Batman's grandmother on his father's side, and that Slam Bradley is actually the true parent of Thomas Wayne, thereby making Batman part black, and thereby rewriting into his history the motivation to correct racial injustices in Gotham. This is just seeding the boilerplate leftist narrative throughout Batman, rewriting his continuity, reconfiguring his motivations, and we're seeing this feed in, yes, from non-continuity stories, but also in the mainline Batman title. So in Chip Zdarsky's Batman run, which has just finished, and now Matt Fraction has restarted from number 1, Batman in James Tynion IV's run lost all of his money. It was procured by the Joker because Catwoman, for some reason, took the Wayne Foundation money, gave it to someone else. It ended up in the hands of the Joker. We had the Joker War. It was then given to Lucius Fox. So Batman lost loads of his money, loads of his equipment, because billionaires are problematic, you see. Then, in Chip Zdarsky's run, there are riots, protests, civil unrest regarding wealth inequality. And there is a villain called Commander Starr, who is posing as a patriot, basically dressed like Homelander from The Boys, who blames in the comic Antifa. Says the mainstream media are manipulating the public because has an exclusive interview with Commander Starr, a fresh face in Gotham who's been patrolling to keep the protesters from turning to more violence. The protesters have been peaceful, Sandy, Starr says. It's the Antifa factions who have been inciting violence, I've been hearing from my sources, and that they intend to start bombing symbols of capitalism, trying to drag this great city down, into a haven for communists and socialists. Gotham must stand against tyranny. Bruce Wayne must stand against it, instead of succumbing to this plague with handouts and platitudes. He's embarrassed to have money, to have inherited his hard-working parents. They would be ashamed of his wealthy redistribution, them and the rest of his family. Essentially saying, wealth inequality is good, billionaires are great, Antifa, socialists and communists are the real threat, and all of this is apparently a lie. It is in the mouth of the villain. Because what these people do is they represent those views as reprehensible by putting them in the mouths of villains. And rather than the villains themselves being ontologically evil, they are avatars of social injustice, and so it takes the hero to restore social justice rather than restoring moral order. So they've turned Batman into an agent of wealth redistribution. And then there's the rewriting of Batman's allies' history. Remember Batman Urban Legends, also overseen by Chip Zdarsky? Well, this was a side story in which Robin, Tim Drake, a historic heterosexual with a long-standing relationship with various women in the comics, including most notably Stephanie Brown, spoiler, suddenly is rewritten to be bisexual. Now, this is a bit of a problem, considering Seduction of the Innocent, Frederick Wortham's book, the absolute embarrassment of a psychologist who apparently consulted on Brown v. Board of Education, which is quite strange. He had accused Batman and Robin of being paedophilic and gay, because he said, well, Batman doesn't have a lady friend, Robin doesn't have a lady friend, they live with Alfred, their male butler, They're basically bachelors living a gay fantasy, which is why, after the Comics Code Authority came in and sanitized comics because he had convinced Congress that comics were corrupting the minds of the youth, Batman then had the introduction of Kathy Kane, Batwoman, the original Batwoman, not the lesbian Batwoman that J.H. Williams III and Greg Rucka helped invent, and the original Batgirl as well, Robin's girlfriend at the time, to try to make them heterosexual. This is why the comics got more absurd and family-friendly. It's why their traditional villains like the Joker, Riddler, and Penguin disappeared for some time. In the comics now, Tim Drake has been rewritten to be bisexual, meaning gay because he's in a same-sex relationship, with a character who showed up in the comics a few times under Bill Willingham and Chuck Dixon's run, Bernard. So, in this fight, Robin comes to the rescue of his friend Bernard, and Bernard says, "Robin, can I ask a favor? Tell Tim Drake he helped me realize my true self, who I truly am. Well, he probably knows he's the smartest guy I've ever met, but tell him I wish we could have finished our date." And then at the end of the comic, when Tim rescues him, he shows up at Bernard's house, and he says, "I want to go on a date with you." Tim Drake is a heterosexual. You should not be rewriting the history of our characters. Especially when Stephanie Brown was still in a relationship with him at the time, and they broke up in another comic after this had happened, to retcon this into history. Now, as you can imagine, the fans, and the likes of Chuck Dixon, the longest consecutive Robin writer, were not too happy about this change. But this was in the works for quite a while, as James Tynion IV, who himself is bisexual, and participated in this Queer Eye for Comic Books LGBTQ Voices on IP Adaptations for Film and TV panel 3 years ago, admitted he wanted to do this in his Detective Comics run, which centered Tim Drake alongside Stephanie Brown, Clayface, Batwoman, as the sort of Batman team book that he did. He said that DC has actually been quite cautious on allowing them to just run roughshod over the history of the characters, rewrite them with various sexualities, and then he said, if we get pushback from the fans on this, well, the pendulum swings both ways, and if it swings against us towards the socially conservative right, then we just have to push back harder. Basically, we don't care what the fans want.
We have made extraordinary ground. Like, we've taken extraordinary ground over the last decade in in comics in particular. Like, I remember just a few years ago, some of the things that are happening right now in, like, specifically DC Comics would never have happened. Absolutely not. I know because I was in the rooms where those ideas were shot down, like, in extreme ways. And seeing the people actually able to step forward with them is, like, really, really something. And I am, like, that's the biggest thing that I want moving forward, is just, like, I want to make sure we keep the ground we've taken, like, because we're going, like, knock on wood, we're all gonna be around this industry for a very long time, and the goal is, and that during that time the culture is going to swing like a pendulum from, like, moments of, like, conservative moments and, like, very liberal moments, and we need, in the moments that the pendulum swings in a direction that is not in our favor, we need to make sure we hold on to the ground that that we've taken. We need to make sure that we continue to support each other and make sure that we keep each other in this industry. And it's all about community. And that's one of the things that, frankly, the other side understands, is that, like, these, the reason some of these groups, these fan groups, feel like they're so, like, all encompassing and all powerful and can dominate the conversation is they've built these little communities where they, like, share and support their own ideas, and then they go out and then they torment people online. And it's just like, we need to show that our community stands together as well in the face of that.
Translation: if you don't like how we've defiled your childhood and taken your favourite characters and wore them as a skinsuit for our political ends, screw you, we're going to keep doing it anyway, you antiquated dinosaur. We don't care how much money we lose or how many fans we irritate. We are morally righteous into breaking up Tim Drake's relationship, ruining his character development, just because we think he should like men because we like men. That's what he's saying. That's what all of these people who are obsessed with their own sexualities, insecure about their own identities, and want to enter your hobby and contort it for their own political purposes think. And this is why the likes of Daniel Warren Johnson thinks that if you don't agree with that, if you act as an agent for the Trump administration, if you are part of pushing the pendulum away from their corner, you should be treated like this ICE agent in this image, or this white supremacist in this image, because that's what they're going to call you, even if you aren't one, and when they call you that, they're wishing violence upon you. So, are they correct? Do they understand Batman's history? Well, I would contend not. Batman has always been a reactionary force. As I mentioned earlier, Batman donates a hell of a lot of money via the Wayne Foundation to orphanages, city regeneration projects, philanthropy. He is a classic altruistic billionaire. But he realizes this is not enough to solve the crimes of Gotham. He realized, back in year one, that he needed to defeat the corruption institutionally in the police department, but also organized crime with the Falcones and the Maronis, by dressing up at night, using his unique resources and talents, and, as a vigilante, restoring order through righteous violence. So let's consult the comics and see where they've gone wrong. First, The Man Who Laughs, the retelling of the first encounter between Batman and the Joker, teased at the end of Batman Year 1, which we'll mention in a moment, but this is by Doug Mankey and Ed Brubaker. And during this, while the Joker is announcing that he's going to kill the rich and influential people of Gotham live on television, a feature that was included in The Dark Knight, which we'll mention later also, he frees a bunch of mental patients from Williams Medical Center. And Batman laments the fact that these men would be housed in Arkham later on where they couldn't hurt anyone. And so Batman says, they aren't responsible for their actions. I know. I don't care. I count 2 dead and 8 injured. This stops now. And Batman, despite these people being mentally ill, not in control of their own faculties, despite what many social progressives would say, that they just need better mental health care, they need a social worker to intervene, Batman uses violence to stop them. He uses violence to stop them from hurting other people. That is the sensible thing to do. What most critics of Batman or law enforcement would say is, if these people just had better mental health services and programs, if they just had gainful employment, everything would be fine. This image is representative of Batman more broadly. Batman shows, by the fact that he's necessary, that just giving money away via the Wayne Foundation is not enough to fix Gotham. When theatrical, monstrous creatures rise up as a direct reaction to Batman's restorative presence, then Batman needs to be on an eternal crusade to put them in their place. This was the case all the way back in Detective Comics 27, which is Batman's first appearance. Stryker, who is the man behind the conspiracy in the story The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, tries to fight Batman and escape custody. Batman punches him, he falls through the railings, and he falls straight into a vat of acid. Very reminiscent of the Joker's origin story, something which, in Detective Comics 27, when the New 52 relaunched it, retold as the Joker's origin story. They combined Joker's origin and The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. But Batman initially killed in his early appearances. He even carried a gun in some instances. And he wasn't just staking vampires through the heart, he was knocking mobsters into lethal vats of acid. Batman is a reactionary force. He uses force to restore order, to correct the debt that injustice has inflicted upon the collective moral community of law-abiding citizens in Gotham. He balances the moral ledger by understanding that justice is not just a matter of capturing the criminal and then letting him sit in a padded cell with a PlayStation and giving him therapy sessions and giving the victim's family counseling on how to deal with their grief. Batman understands that the only way to stop crime is to act as a deterrent and use force on the people who are either willing to be deterred from committing further crimes by force, or so incapable of controlling themselves, or so evil as to not be susceptible to reason that they just need to be stopped, restrained, and put away from the rest of us. And this is why justice does not, unlike what Grant Morrison says, fall along class lines. Batman should not be refraining from beating up thieves or drug addicts just because they themselves are less wealthy than himself. And this is from Frank Miller's Batman Year One. It's the second issue. It's the first night where Batman debuts his costume after the bat flies through the window and he decides, yes, father, I shall become a bat. These are just men stealing utilities and appliances from an apartment, like a record player and a TV. Batman stops them anyway. Doesn't matter whether or not they're going to go and resell those appliances on the black market to go and buy bread for their families. They're stealing from someone else. Theft is wrong, ontologically. By the fact that we have the terms rape, theft, and murder implies that the acts are unwanted by the recipient, so it has violated their bodily autonomy and is therefore wrong. And so Batman steps in to stop these thugs from stealing from someone. That is not problematic. It is only problematic to people who think that crime only happens because of material inequality and the hidden hand of racial oppression. And then there's the most reactionary Batman text, which is also the most famous one, so it's kind of inexcusable to pretend that Batman is a left-winger, The Dark Knight Returns, where Gotham is plunged into complete chaos when Superman intercepts a nuclear missile from the USSR and it causes a kind of solar flare or EMP effect that knocks out telecommunications and electricity in Gotham, and when people start taking advantage by looting, stealing, and killing, Batman corrals a gang of the mutants, whose leader he defeated in a mud wrestling match, and turns them into the sons of Batman. He tells them, don't use guns, don't kill, which is obviously an element of his character because his parents were murdered by a firearm, but he still takes charge and essentially enforces martial law from on horseback, rather than allowing the people to take advantage of the chaos by stealing things and thinking, don't worry, the insurance companies will clear up the mess later. No, Batman is a force for order. In Arkham Asylum, the other comic that was famous that came out at the time, much like the rendition of the Joker in The Dark Knight Returns, Joker is depicted as a sexual pervert, a degenerate, a force for corruption. Grant Morrison originally wanted the Joker dressed like Madonna from an album cover. They wanted him in stilettos and fishnets, and DC said, no, we're not doing that because people will think that Jack Nicholson, who's just played the Joker in Batman, is gay. So we're not gonna do that. But the Joker still torments Batman, pinches his behind, and Batman says, take your filthy hands off me, filthy degenerate. Batman's pretty socially conservative. He's always been a ladies' man, which is why the insinuation in The Dark Knight Returns, when Joker takes Batman into the Tunnel of Love, when Batman reappears on the TV screen and says darling, when Joker implies lipstick, when he binds Catwoman up and dresses her up as Wonder Woman, the insinuation is that Joker has an unhealthy sexual desire towards Batman and Batman repudiates it at all possible points. This was actually the crux of Scott Snyder's story, Death of the Family, where Joker himself greeted Batman as darling and was attempted to kill off all of the Bat family so that it was only him and Batman left, as if the kids had gotten in the way of the marriage. And Batman did not agree to that. So the idea, as Grant Morrison said in his interview with Playboy, that Batman is gay, that gayness is built into Batman, that he's wealthy and a sexual deviant, the idea that basically Frederick Wortham was right with Seduction of the Innocent, which then has strange implications for Robin being bisexual after being adopted by Batman when both Jack Drake and Tim's mother are killed. Yeah, not in keeping with Batman's character at all. You're just polluting his character with your strange progressive politics, because you yourself have an unorthodox sexual appetite. Grant. And then we get to Kingdom Come, which is, again, one of the most reactionary texts about Batman, written by a congenital shitlib, who is Mark Waid. And Kingdom Come ends in an unfortunate way, as we used to cover on Comics Corner, where the superheroes renounce their authority, despite being absolutely right to intern them all in this massive prison, because all of the supervillains are stand-ins for Satan, because this is based on the Book of Revelation, and instead says, let the UN, a neutral institution, govern the planet instead. And so all the superheroes retire, which is ridiculous. But in Kingdom Come, Batman has become a sort of authoritarian police state supervisor, because gangs of youths are running around Gotham with firearms, and so he has outsourced enforcement to gigantic bat robots, which he controls. And it says Batman has his city under control. So no, Batman is not going to permit the kind of riots that we see in The Fortress, for example. It's just an absurd misreading of the character. And this absurd misreading is noted by Frank Miller. So Frank Miller, in this now deleted letter, and bear in mind, Frank Miller has Trump derangement syndrome and depicted Donald Trump as a puppet of the Joker and Darkseid in the fourth sequel to The Dark Knight Returns, but pretty much everyone agrees that we discount all the sequels from Dark Knight Returns because, well, especially Dark Knight Strikes Again, is ugly and unreadable. But during Occupy Wall Street, Frank Miller wrote this, a letter titled Anarchy. He says, everybody's been too damn polite about this nonsense. The Occupy movement, whether displaying itself on Wall Street or in the streets of Oakland, which has, with unspeakable cowardice, embraced it, is anything but an exercise of our blessed First Amendment. Occupy is nothing but a pack of louts, thieves, and rapists. Correct? An unruly mob fed by Woodstock-era nostalgia and putrid false righteousness. These clowns can do nothing but harm America. Occupy is nothing short of a clumsy, poorly expressed attempt at anarchy, to the extent that the movement, some movement, except if the word bowel is attached, is anything more than an ugly fashion statement by a bunch of iPhone, iPad-wielding spoiled brats who should stop getting in the way of working people and find jobs for themselves. This is no popular uprising, this is garbage, and goodness knows they're spewing their garbage, both politically and physically, every which way they can find. Wake up, pond scum, America is at war against a ruthless enemy. He's referring, of course, to Islamic terrorism. That's why he wrote Batman Holy Terror. That's why he featured 9/11 in The Dark Knight Strikes Again, because as a New Yorker, he was appalled by 9/11 happening while he was writing the comic. It's also the same reason why, as a New Yorker, he saw crime and degeneracy filling New York and wrote The Dark Knight Returns as a kind of fantasy after getting mugged in New York about Batman coming in and restoring order. Lo and behold, Giuliani did just that with broken windows policing. So Frank Miller wrote Batman, the two most important Batman texts, Year One and The Dark Knight Returns, with Batman as an explicitly right-wing, reactionary vigilante. He continues, maybe between your bouts of self-pity and all the other tasty tidbits of narcissism where you've been served up in your sheltered, comfy little worlds, you've heard terms like Al-Qaeda and Islamicism. And this enemy of mine, not of yours apparently, must be getting itself a dark chuckle, if not an outright horse laugh, out of your vain, childish, self-destructive spectacle. You know, this seems particularly pertinent in the aftermath of Zoran Mamdani being elected mayor of New York, and having made excuses for Hamas before, calling to globalize the Intifada. Calling to confiscate property from white people because as a third worldist, he doesn't like white people, he likes non-white people, and so he wants to steal their stuff and give it away to other people. A bit like Bane from The Dark Knight Rises, which, as we saw, was released a year after this letter, during the Occupy Wall Street movement. The first act of terrorism Bane does publicly, after hijacking that plane and kidnapping Dr. Pavel to then build a nuclear bomb in Gotham, is he raids the Gotham Stock Exchange. And he then gives a speech, which we'll be going through in a moment. Just to finish this, he says, in the name of decency, go back to your parents, you losers, go back to your mother's basements and play with your Lords of Warcraft, or better yet, enlist for the real thing. Maybe our military could whip some of you into shape. They might not let you babies keep your iPhones though. Try to soldier on, schmucks. Based. I missed that version of Frank Miller. So this is why The Dark Knight Rises is, according to Forbes, who probably said this through gritted teeth, an instant conservative classic. Because Bane is the muscular version of Occupy Wall Street. Bane is Zoran Mamdani on steroids. Bane is the French Revolution. This is why, in Bane's Uprising, whether or not he's a total nihilist, just using the class consciousness rhetoric as window dressing is, of course, debated in the film, even said about by Jim Gordon, who doesn't believe that he would ever give the trigger to a member of Gotham's public, and of course, he doesn't. He gives it to Talia al Ghul as a revenge plot against Batman for killing Ra's. Christopher Nolan, not Ra's. Anyway. But in the film, Bane launches this revolution, and the people of Gotham, including Catwoman and her sidekick, who's meant to be Holly, but I can't remember what they call her in the film, go around, raided rich people's homes, they throw rich people off balconies, they take their stuff, they have parties with their possessions, and the city becomes an ungovernable pandemonium. Because out of pure spite for people having more than they do, people go and steal from people, launch kangaroo courts, drown them in ice water. As this review at the time says, This film shows no ideological sympathy for the Occupy movement. Bane, the terrible villain of the film, literally occupies Wall Street, taking control of the trading floor of the stock exchange. Police are hesitant to deal with the problem, partly based on class warfare complaints that it's not their money at risk, but the money of the wealthy Wall Street guys. But a trader explains that it is indeed the cops' money too, that it's everybody's money that is part of the financial system, including cops' pensions. Bane was created by Chuck Dixon and Graham Nolan, two lifelong conservatives, which is pretty unusual in the world of comic book creators, and both very good men, by the way, and excellent creators, and I think DC sorely misses talent like theirs. He is, as his name implies, a curse, in this case, the curse of the class warfare. Interestingly, Dixon complained about Rush Limbaugh's misfire in trying to link the villain with Bane Capital as part of some liberal media conspiracy. So, this is the scene that tips you off that actually the people currently depicting Batman, via Absolute Batman, as someone who would strangle an ICE agent, or overlook a riot where people are stealing TVs in the fortress, just have the politics of Bane instead. I'm not going to play this scene, because again, copyright will screw me over, but in this scene, Bane says, while tearing down the legacy of Harvey Dent, "Behind you stands a symbol of oppression, Blackgate Prison. We take Gotham from the corrupt, the rich, the oppressors of generations who've kept you down with the myth of opportunity, and we give it to you, the people. Gotham is yours, none shall interfere, do as you please, but start by storming Blackgate and freeing the oppressed. Step forward, those who would serve." So, resentful revolutionaries who want to steal money from the rich should also treat the criminals like they themselves are oppressed, by the dint of them being locked up for crimes against people and property, because criminals are only criminals because of material inequality, because of political corruption. This is, yet again, the opinion of the Bolshevik communists who weaponized those people, thieves, rapists, and murderers, who were imprisoned under the Tsarist regime and made them the prison guards for the gulags in which they interned their political enemies. Alexander Solzhenitsyn details this in the Gulag Archipelago. This is Bane, and this is the politics of Daniel Warren Johnson, or Tom Taylor, or Tom King. So, the people writing Batman now share the politics of his villains. And that is why they have subversively woven in social progressivism and Marxist class consciousness and resentment into Batman and written him out of character. The Dark Knight is also a deeply conservative film. I disagree with Andrew Klavan's review, which was famous at the time of release, as to why, because he thought that Batman and George Bush have a lot in common, because of course Batman uses surveillance software for the cell phones in Gotham, which Lucius Fox thinks is wrong, types in his name, and destroys, and then doesn't resign ultimately, because he recognises that Batman trusted him to enact the failsafe. But he uses that surveillance technology to spy on the Joker. Now, this is not from the real world necessarily, it's also from Brother Eye and the Tower of Babel contingency plots that Batman has in the comics, which end up going awry. But Andrew Klavan saw a parallel between the war on terror in the real world and the introduction of the Patriot Act and the NSA spying on phone conversations by Americans, and now, under the Biden administration, doing it internationally. Thanks. And Batman's activity trying to fight the Joker, who acts like a terrorist, in terms of an Islamic terrorist, random bombings, indiscriminate killings, etc., and using surveillance tech to try and find said terrorist, and successfully doing so. So, I disagree with Klavan on this because, unlike George Bush, Batman didn't say, well, after I've captured the Joker, let's bring millions more Jokers into Gotham, and actually, Joker's philosophy is just misunderstood. It's actually the philosophy of peace. No. Instead, The Dark Knight is correct. Some men can't be bought, bartered with, or reasoned with. Some men are just ontologically evil and want to watch the world burn, and the only solution is dressing up in a bat costume, beating them to a pulp, and throwing them in prison or an asylum. Or doing what he did in Detective Comics 27, and has been unwilling to do since. So, I want to finish on one more thing, which would suggest that Batman finds leftist politics repugnant, and that is the forgotten history of Batman being a Christian, according to his writers. According to Frank Miller, he's a Catholic, but of course, Frank Miller is a Catholic, and his Daredevil was Catholic, so he frequently only writes one type of character. But as a Catholic, I'll take it. I believe Alan Grant, who's Scottish, wrote Batman as an Episcopalian, which makes sense considering he's New Englander, old money. But Batman has consistently been Christian since his first appearances. So this is Detective Comics 33, which was the first time that Batman's origin was told. As you can see here, the Waynes being gunned down. And days later, Batman is praying to God, swearing by the spirits of his parents to avenge their deaths by spending the rest of his life warring on all criminals. And this scene was retold in Batman Dark Detective, which is the Steve Englehart comic that inspired The Dark Knight. You will see lots of plot beats repeated here. For example, Silver St. Cloud comes back into Batman's life. She was the character that Rachel Dawes was based on, as well as Rachel from Batman Year 2, which was then adapted into Mask of the Phantasm. And she is engaged to a district attorney who looks a lot like Aaron Eckhart, and he ends up getting cut in half, much like Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight, where half his body gets burned and he becomes Two-Face. And then the Joker is the one who's responsible for it. So, and a lot of the lines of dialogue are taken straight from Dark Detective. Steve Englehart wasn't very happy about what he thought was plagiarism, but it's clear inspiration. Anyway, in issue 2, they recreate Batman's origin from Batman 33. And in this scene, Bruce goes up, prays to God, says, "I swear by the spirits of my parents to avenge their deaths by spending the rest of my life warring on all criminals." The bat then comes through the window, and he says, "A bat, it's an omen, I shall become a bat." And this is young Bruce and adult Bruce continuing to pray. This is Batman in costume continuing to pray. So Batman is canonically a Christian. Given the hostility towards Christianity by modern progressivism, because it sets standards on your behaviour and says there is a definitive standard of right and wrong, and that cuts against some of the sexual proclivities that Catwoman in Injustice was lecturing the president on accepting, it would seem that Batman's Christian faith has been conveniently forgotten because it is anathema to the politics of the writers that are trying to turn him into a pro-Occupy Wall Street leftist. Bane, basically. And then there's Batman the Chalice, written by Chuck Dixon, where Batman becomes the custodian of the Holy Grail. He inherits the duty to protect it from his familial line. And in testing it out in the Batcave, he pours it on his knee and it's magically healed. So he believes in miracles. And he speaks to Oracle over the telephone line that the Bat family use, and he says, "It's a holy object, I've seen the proof, it's a miracle, it has healing powers." He thought that she might be interested, and she says, "I don't believe in miracles." She says, "For miracles to work, you need faith, and I don't have that." Batman asks her, surprised, "You don't believe in God?" So, Batman believes in God. Which makes sense, because if Batman is an empiricist, and he's worked alongside Jim Corrigan, the Spectre, the agent of God's wrath, if he's had literal angels on the Justice League team, if, in Day of Judgment, he was part of the reason why Hal Jordan became the Spectre, then he knows God exists. He knows there is the presence. His family are Christians. He prays. Therefore, Batman is a Christian. Batman is reactionary. So, Batman is explicitly right-wing and attempts to rewrite him as a progressive who will kill ICE agents, endorse riots, and browbeat the president on trans rights is just absurd. It is ungratefully hijacking an existing property that good men like Chuck Dixon and Graham Nolan, and even liberals like Denny O'Neil, built up as a recognizable brand with credibility and beloved stories, and then using it for your own vicious, contemporary, political bugbears. And so I want to finish with this. This is what Batman would actually be doing. This is, as Rich Johnson of Bleeding Cool complains, drawn by artist Sergio Cariello, who's a Brazilian immigrant who came to the USA to attend the Cubit School. So, legal Brazilian immigrant thinks Batman, very right-wing, would arrest Antifa and deport illegal immigrants. So, I think this guy probably has the right of it. I think Chuck Dixon also has the right of it. And I think this artist in question has the right of it. Batman would be saving the likes of Iriana Zarutska from career criminals like DeCarlos Brown Jr., who the permissive justice system, with the morality of Bane, kept letting out because they thought the criminals were the oppressed people. No. This is what Batman would be doing. And if you're writing him any other way, then you're just a propagandist. You're not just insulting the fans, you're betraying the hard work of hundreds of writers, artists, pencilers, inkers, and editors who made this character, made this industry, something that lots of people love. Batman was never a leftist. They know this. That's why they have to rewrite his history to imply that violence against you for your politics is justified.